The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and welcome to our first Third Thursday webinar of 2023. We're excited to have Pattie Skriba here to present on getting acquainted with Baldrige. And we are recording this session so people can view it after this session is completed. The agenda for this morning is we have a few announcements, and then we will introduce our webinar speaker. Of course, we'll have the session with the presentation, and then at the end, we'll have time for questions as well as introduce our next webinar in February. If you have any questions, please type them in the control panel. There's a place where you can type questions there. You can also raise your hand and I can unmute you. We have a lot of people attending today, so we're keeping everyone on mute. So really the best way is to type it in the question box, and we'll make sure that we ask Pattie the question. There's also a handout in the control box, which is a copy of the presentation. So if you'd like to download that so you have a copy of it, you can do that right from the control panel. As a reminder, this webinar is hosted by 7 of the Alliance programs. So on behalf of the California Council for Excellence, the Mid-Atlantic Alliance for Performance Excellence Northwest, SWAY, Oklahoma Quality Foundation, Quality New Mexico, and the Partnership for Excellence, we welcome you to this webinar. I'm Margot Hoffman with the Partnership for Excellence, and I just want to remind you that all of our programs have ongoing events throughout the year. So please visit the website for the program that you are a part of to see what activities you can engage in. There's one activity I do want to share with all of you. If you recall from our last webinar, I shared with you that Illinois became part of the Partnership for Excellence. And we're really excited to be hosting a meet and greet 1 week from today at the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund in Oak Brook. And if you're interested in attending that, the meet and greet is in the afternoon. But we also are doing a workshop in the morning, so you can attend all day. There's no fee for the event, but we do need you to RSVP for planning purposes. So just send me an email or give me a call, and we'll get you signed up. But we'd love to have you join us a week from now for our Illinois meet and greet. We also want to thank all of our organizational members. Most of our organizations are 501(c)(3), so we greatly appreciate the support of our members and sponsors who allow us to cultivate performance excellence throughout our region. I would now like to introduce Bob Bittner from the MAKE program, who is going to introduce our presenter.
Thanks, Margot, and good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Pattie Skriba comes to us with a wealth of Baldrige experience. Before retiring, Pattie worked at Advocate Healthcare for 29 years. She had a key leadership role in Advocate Good Samaritan Hospital, winning the Baldrige Award in 2010. Pattie served in the Illinois State Program as an examiner, judge, and chief judge, and she also served as a judge and chair on the judges panel of the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award. In addition to that, Pattie has generously shared her experience and her expertise by leading pre-conference workshops at the Baldrige Fall Conference. So with that, join me in welcoming Pattie.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to be with you. And when I looked at the list of those who are registered, we are spanning America and beyond. So it's good to have voices from literally around the world and around our nation. So I'm hoping that today will be a value-added investment of your time, because I know in these days that time is a precious commodity. So let's begin. What I'd like to do to start with is, hold on, I'd like to be able to advance my slides is what I'd like to do. I would like to share with you kind of the thought process, the history, that went behind the Baldrige Award. And so here's a little timeline that I'd like to kind of go through with you. So if you recall from the history that you took in school, from 1939 to 1945 was World War II, which was a very tragic event in our world. And but from a consumer point of view, during that time, especially no matter what country you're in, they were rationing food, rationing different types of equipment and supplies in order to be able to fund the war, or to be able to get materials to the soldiers who were fighting. So there became this pent-up consumer demand. The United States was very innovative in that they reinvented our manufacturing plants and businesses to provide for the war. Unfortunately, other countries like Japan, their infrastructures got decimated. Between 1945 and 1960, that was known in the United States as the decade of prosperity. And that occurred because all that pent-up demand that came as a result of the war, the U.S. was the only major power not devastated by the war, probably because there was no, other than Pearl Harbor, there was no attack on our soil, but also the fact that we had already begun to reinvent ourselves. So the U.S. began producing for the world. And quality at that point in time really didn't matter because it was going to sell no matter where it went. Our economy grew by leaps and bounds. There was minimal inflation and unemployment was extremely low. Between 1960s, the 60s, and the 70s, the United States began losing its competitive edge. Why? Because other countries started to come back online. Japan, they rebuilt their infrastructure and their capacity to produce, and they had the advantage of quality guru Edward Deming to help them. And they were not only working on producing, but the quality of what they produced was very, very far superior to what was happening in the United States. In the United States, our coal, steel, and manufacturing had a sharp decline. Factories were being abandoned. And in the Midwest, we became known as the Rust Belt because those factories were sitting outside in the weather and began to rust. 1980s, the United States was in a major crisis from an economic and business point of view. The world was producing products at a higher quality and a lower cost. We had a double-dip recession. Many blue-collar jobs disappeared. And at that point in time, President Reagan, convened a panel of experts. And one of the men that was called was Malcolm Baldrige. He was our U.S. Secretary of Commerce, but he was a businessman. And there are many things I like about Malcolm Baldrige, but one of those was he really was a turnaround kind of guy. He got called to a East Coast brass button company that was failing prior to becoming Secretary of Commerce, and he turned it around, and that company to its day, though it's reinvented itself multiple times, is still in existence. So this panel of experts, they talked about many, many strategies, but one of the strategies that they came up with was to put a stake in the ground for quality, to bring it back to the United States, particularly in manufacturing. And so they put together a quality framework for manufacturing and a national award. It went to Congress. It got passed by Congress. It was called the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Improvement Act of 1987. And I encourage you sometime to go to the Baldrige website or just Google it and take a look at what was in the thinking of kind of the forefounders of the Baldrige program. So let me tell you a few other facts about the Baldrige program. First, it's based on core values, 11 core values that will resonate with many of you. When you read through them, you'll say, oh man, our organization, we're really strong in that. But others might come up and say, you know, that's an area for us to grow in. The next fact that I'd like to bring up to you is that since 1987, 35 years have gone by, but the Baldrige program hasn't just sat still. It has evolved over time to meet the changing needs that are in our businesses, our schools, our hospitals, our work environment, our nation, globally. But one of the things I want to point out here is that it moved from a product quality assurance program back in 1987 to an organizational performance excellence approach. I also want to bring out the fact that there is a Baldrige community. It is, you can see on the left of your screen that Baldrige is really a part of the center, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which reports to the Department of Commerce. So Baldrige is a part of the Department of Commerce. If you think back to Malcolm Baldrige, who was the Secretary of Commerce at that point in time, there's a board of overseers, there's a board of examiners and judges. Obviously, you have the Baldrige Award recipients that are a part of this community. We have cooperating organizations. There's a foundation. ASQ is a contractor. Baldrige was one of the first, if not the first, public and private partnership. There's one framework, but two programs. I was confused by this when we first started back in 2007. So there are three versions of the program that hit all sectors of our nation in terms of whether it's not-for-profit, service, education, healthcare, government. But there are two programs. One is at the state level, which is a part of the alliance that Margot talked about and Bob talked about. So your state program or state is a part of one of those alliance programs. And then there's the national program. There's a proven record of driving excellence. There's 124 organizations that have received the award over time, but once you start looking at their results, they are truly role model. And then way back several years ago, Truven, IBM Watson now, they did a study between Baldrige hospitals and those who were top 100 hospitals, which is a really prestigious kind of award that you can get if you're in healthcare. And they basically found that there was a correlation, that those who went for Baldrige in many cases surpassed even those who were top 100, and that their rate of improvement exceeded those who were top 100. So now we're looking at 2023. I love this little guy standing at the bottom of the steps wondering, do I want to step up during 2023? And I started wondering, well, what are the key challenges? And if you do a Google search on challenges for 2023, you're gonna see a whole bunch. But I landed on one that seemed to expand or cross over into a lot of different sectors, and it was from the Forbes magazine. And they talked, you can see the changes that are up there on the writing on the wall for 2023. Everything from supply chain security, which is kind of going back to the whole COVID. I think that's surfaced a huge need in many organizations. Obviously, with the recession coming, there are money consequences that we're going to be facing. Increasing customer expectations because organizations tend to continue to innovate. Digital transformation, obviously the war for talent is occurring, and it's going to intensify. There's data and device cybersecurity is continuing to be an issue, and sustainability. That how do we not last through 2023 but go into 2024 and beyond? So if you look at beyond 2023 and you do take a look up the stairs to what's ahead, you know it's going to be an upward journey, but the bottom line for all of these is that there's going to be continuous change. So what do we know about change? Well, we know organizations are not designed for change. We also know that top-down and roll-out change management programs don't work for transformational change. Way back in 1996, and I think this is still true, John Cotter talked about large-scale change programs. 70% of them fail. The literature, if you start Googling around and doing some digging around, you will see that a change program is not what we need moving ahead. Rather, we need a change platform. In fact, a part of the leader's job is to build a change platform, not to design a change program. Now, the question here is, does the Baldrige process that was birthed in 1987, is it still able to empower organizations to reach its goals, improve its results, and become more competitive? Is it a model that is also a platform for change? So let's go back to a fundamental principle upon which not only Baldrige, but other aspects of life are built upon. And that is, we're perfectly designed to get the results we're getting. That's true in our personal lives, but it's also true in organizations. Every organization is perfectly designed to get the results they are getting. But you may say, but I thought that Baldrige was an award. And you're right, it is. It's the nation's highest honor for performance excellence. Some call it the Presidential Quality Award. You also may know enough about Baldrige that if you crack open one of the frameworks, you're going to say, well, wait a minute, it's an award, but that's a lot of questions. You're right on that count as well. But also, did you know that Baldrige can be considered, hopefully this will pop up here, it's really considered a blueprint for organizational design. It's a proven framework used by high-performing organizations, basically to get better and to be able to measure their progress as they do get better. So and you may have seen this icon on the website or in some of the literature from Baldrige. You'll see underneath it, it says improve your performance. And so how do you use that, the Baldrige framework? So Montgomery Public School System, the largest school district in Maryland, and I think somebody is on the call today from Maryland, it's made up of 209 public schools. Can you imagine 209 public schools? They serve over 150,000 students, and they are a 2010 recipient. They recognize that an organization is made up of parts and connections. And they put this into very simple terms on their website. And I wanted to share it with you because they say Baldrige measures organizational parts and connections. How good are the parts? How good are the connections between the parts? They said it's a blueprint for building good, well-connected parts. And there's a process in the framework to determine which parts and which connections add value and which do not. And I just liked how they put that because I thought, oh, that's really, really simple. And that really is what Baldrige is. So let's talk a little bit more about organizational design. There are three major components that go into organizational design. But the most important one is the end result. Because in your organization, I'm sure your personal performance review, as well as your organization's goal, is to improve its results. Outcomes, outputs, whether it's products, qualities, numbers of customers, money, growth, high test scores, clinical outcomes, that's the bottom line. Whatever those key results are to sustainability, and they are things that are important to stakeholders. But results don't just happen. We're perfectly designed to get the results that we're getting. I'd like to propose to you that there's two elements that create your results. It's what's important to your organization and your processes. And it's not that those are standalone, because what's important in your organization has to connect to your processes, and your processes have to integrate with what's important that you say is important to you. So let's talk a little bit more about what these are. So what's important? What do we mean by that? Well, what's your vision? What's your mission? What's your philosophy? What's your culture? Your facilities, your locations, who's your customer? What are you capable of in your organization? What's your org structure? What's your workforce skills? Their requirements? All sorts of things go into what's important. What are your main services? What's your core competency? Who's your partners? Who's your collaborators? All those things are what's important. When we're talking about processes, we're talking about how work gets done. All work is a part of a process. It's a series of steps or actions to get to that product, or to get kids to read, or to get to the right clinical outcome. If you step back, your processes are the things that create your value. But it's not just enough that you have processes or that you've defined what's important. There has to be that integration. Now, let me talk to you a little bit about how these three are not always clear. I'd like to say that sometimes what's important in an organization is kind of like finding Waldo. You're not sure what's important. And I'll talk with you about that in just a moment, but it's just unclear. Or maybe certain people in the organization knows what's important, but it's not a global thing that everybody who needs to know knows about. In addition to that, processes, they're not always defined. They may not exist, but they're informal, or what is a very common one, it's very person dependent, or it's not connected to what's important. Now, the beautiful thing about Baldrige is that it takes all three of these and it puts them in the framework. So let me start with the org profile. It's called the organizational profile. That asks you a lot of what questions. Some of them, many people in your organization could answer a lot of those what questions, like, what are your key facilities? Okay. They may ask, what are your main technologies? Maybe most people can answer them. But there are many that are unclear. I know when we started it, there were about 8 items out of the org profile that we as a senior leadership team, because we went through this org profile, we didn't delegate it out to somebody. We went through and answered all the what questions ourselves, which I highly recommend. But there were 8 things that we had never talked about. For example, what were our main services? Well, when we started talking about that, we had 40 or 50 services. Well, that's a lot of services. Those aren't the key services. Those aren't the main services. And we had to use our data to help us figure out, well, what are our main services? You say, well, what does it matter? Well, it matters quite a bit, because when you go to your process of strategic planning, if you're saying oncology is one of your main services, there better be a very robust strategic plan around oncology. And we found that we did not, number one, make those definitions clear, but number two, integrate those in our processes, which was holding us back on our results. The same would be true for the processes. In Baldrige, there's 6 process categories that call out key processes that high-performing organizations have in place, that they're systematic, they're repeatable. And then finally, results. There's one category based on results, and it guides you into both outcomes and process results that are important. So the Baldrige framework is a design mechanism for organizations. Let me put it a different way. And if you have a Baldrige framework book in front of you, you can see this in your book on page 31. Organizations set goals, strategic goals and operational goals. If processes are informal or person dependent, lots of activities, people coming up with ideas and implementing ideas, or the goals are not well defined, those strategic and operational goals are just not going to be achieved, because we're reacting to our problems. Once those processes get much more systematic and repeatable, and maybe there's some improvements that are going on in those processes as well, those strategic and operational goals become more achieved. Then the next stage would be they become aligned. Sometimes in organizations, a process can work against another process, and you don't even know it because it's on one end of the organization to the other end of the organization. But when you start looking at your processes and making sure that they are aligned and they're working in concert, and operations are repeatable processes, and there's frequent evaluation and improvement of, you know, what worked, what didn't work, learning gets shared, more of your strategic and operational goals are achieved. And then finally, the last level is, just as we had talked about those little arrows before, integration. Probably the most mature organizations are the organizations that are mostly integrated. Those organizations are achieving their strategic and operational goals more fully. And so that's what Baldrige is about. Because the Baldrige is non-prescriptive, but process-based, it is also a platform for not just improvement, but also for change. Let me give you an example. In organizations that I observed as the COVID pandemic came into play, we began to see how organizations that already had well-defined processes in their senior leader communication, in their staffing, in their supply chain, in how they were listening to their customers, those types of things. When COVID hit, they were able to take those existing processes and improve them, tweak them to address some of the needs that were there. But those organizations that did not have that kind of start with well-defined processes, they were scrambling, trying to figure out what to do when and that type of thing. And many, they fared well, and many not so well. I'd like to think that Baldrige is not only a change platform and an organizational improvement platform, but if you stop and think about it, I'd like to think of it as a way to create an operating model or an operating system in your organization. What is an operating model? It basically goes back to that blueprint for how value will be created and delivered to your customer. You know, we rely on operating models and platforms in many facets of our life. You know, some of you may be watching this webinar on a Mac. Others of us are watching on Windows. If you think about your retirement, investments, you pick a platform that you're going to use to make those investments. If you do online selling, I did eBay for a while, and now there are so many options, you know, with Facebook Marketplace and others that are there to be able to sell. You pick a platform, and actually having a platform to be able to pull all the disparate aspects that are important to your organization all together makes change a little bit easier. Now, Jim Collins and Charles Callahan from Memorial Healthcare refer to Baldrige as a model to operate or manage your organization. So here's the quote from Charles Callahan from Memorial Health System in Illinois. The Baldrige criteria for performance excellence are not rules to follow. Rather, they are a set of integrated principles that are designed to foster an organization's development of its own internal system for excellence. Now, it's matched to your own unique mission and vision and values and culture and customers, but it becomes this internal systems for excellence. Now, every organization who wants to achieve excellence needs similar approaches or processes in similar categories. And what you see on the screen here are these categories. And these categories are the categories that are in Baldrige. They can be core to any organization's operating system or operating model. In each category, there are common approaches or processes that in most organizations they need to do their work and achieve excellence. You could probably come up with many of those because you're already doing many of those in your organizations. So what are some of these processes? So I went through the framework books, and they're all the same. So you kind of see what's in them. And some of these pop out, you know, senior leadership communication, governance, your ethical process, your community support process, that would be in the leadership category. Obviously, strategy, how you develop it, how you implement it. If you go down the workforce, it's how you plan, workforce planning, your recruiting, hiring, and onboarding, and measurement, organizational performance measurement. You know, how do you select your measures? How often do you review them? All of these processes exist. Now, if you look in the category, in the frameworks, you will see that these are not named just like this, because the way the framework words them, they're in a series of questions. And all of these begin with how questions versus the organizational profile begins with what questions. The process categories begin with how. You know, how do you recruit, hire, and onboard? How do your senior leaders communicate? But if you ferret it out, they really do come back to what are these key approaches. Again, no doubt your organization's already doing many of these. You know, see, you lead, senior leaders communicate, you plan and deploy those plans, you measure, all those things. But it's not a checklist. Yes, I do it. It's not what do you do, it's how do you do it? What is your process? And then are the right people using it? Is that process being improved over time? Does it integrate with what's important to your organization or to other processes? So if this is a backdrop, how do you do Baldrige? So I'm going to give you a slice of how you can begin doing Baldrige. You may have already begun doing Baldrige. Your state programs are critical to help you, to coach you, to provide webinars and programs to help you do Baldrige. But I'm going to slice out one thing that will apply to this process orientation. So first, our state programs can help us and guide us. And not just that, they can recognize us, because if your organization is like any organization, you need recognition along the way. There's nothing wrong with looking for an award. Good Sam launched an improvement journey in 2005. We called it Moving from Good to Great. By 2007, we had made some major improvements that were yielding some remarkable results, like moving our outpatient satisfaction from the 7th percentile to the 99th percentile. Then we adopted Baldrige, and we set about writing our application. And I will be honest, I think we were after the award because we felt like we had already improved a tremendous amount. What happened was we wrote the award or the application, we achieved our state level, but for us, that work was more a documentation exercise. That was about answering questions. Many of the questions we couldn't answer. Our feedback reports confirmed that we didn't have systematic approaches for most of those improvement processes. So we switched our mindset. We switched our perspective. And we put the application in the background and improvement or building our operating model for performance excellence in the foreground. So I'm going to challenge you to do Baldrige. One of the things you will want to do is keep improvement at the forefront. Even if you are continue to apply at your state program, which that's great, keep doing that. Go to your state program for coaching, those types of things. But you've got to keep improvement at the foreground of what you're doing. Because my experience is that organizations start answering the questions, and after multiple attempts of writing and applying, they give up, or they don't find it's really relevant. So let's move along here. So how do you do Baldrige? One way you can start is by focusing on the processes that are embedded in the criteria, not the questions. Assess your key needs and link your need to the contributing process or approach. So let's take a look at what Forbes says we're all going to be facing in 2023. The writing on the wall was about our workforce. How do we get talent? How do we recruit them? How do we hire? How do we onboard them? And how do we retain them? Well, if you are going to focus on that particular need in your organization, what process or approach that's in the framework would you begin to improve? Well, it might be that in workforce, obviously, recruiting, hiring, and onboarding, it would be that approach or approaches, or perhaps you would include your learning and development approach as well. Well, then what would you do after you decided that? Well, the next piece would be to define it or to design your approach. I would suggest that you identify who's the owner. Well, in most cases, this would be an easy one. Your VP of HR or your director of HR, who's the owner of the process. Then gather a few users of that particular process and begin to define your approach. Ask, what do we currently do? Typically, processes or approaches are drafted in one of three ways. In fact, if you review any of the Baldrige applications, you will see, which are online, you will see approaches are documented in their application, or maybe an abbreviated version. It could be a chart like this, an individual process, which would be perfect for hiring. Sometimes it might be a collection that falls together in a chart. Or sometimes if there's a more complicated process, like your strategic planning or your performance measurement, it might be a system of connected processes. You might find that as you bring this group together, you may find that everybody does it a little differently. I ask participants in this workshop, my longer workshop, you know, how many of you hire the same way in your organization? And it's kind of scary, but typical that in most organizations, you know, if you're in this department, you can hire this way, and in another department, you can hire this way, or if you're at a certain level, you hire this way, and there's not a systematic, repeatable approach. So the first step is to define, or if you don't have a systematic approach, design your approach, and design your approach based on what is said in the criteria in the framework book. Then, once that occurs, you've assessed what your needs are, you've identified which process and who the leader is, the owner, then you design it or you document it using the criteria. The next step, once you've done that, is to deploy it, which is basically saying, are the people who need to use this process using this process? Many times there is a systematic approach, but not everybody is using it. Measure your results. I'm going to go back to the hiring. How do you know that process is effective? Well, you might do first-year turnover. You might do first 90-day turnover, or you might do the number of offers versus acceptance. You will decide what is the measure of the effectiveness of that approach and measure it. Then compare yourself to other comparable organizations, best in class, Baldrige recipients, or many of us subscribe to various databases that can help us know exactly how we compare to other organizations. Based on your results and how you compare, make improvements to that approach, continuing to document your design document of that particular approach. And you may say, well, why are you pushing documenting and designing? Because once you get your processes, your key processes documented and designed, and you're tracking your measures of improvement and your cycles of improvement and what you're benchmarking against, as leaders go in and out of your organization, the next leader can come in and not miss a beat. And that's where your sustainability comes in. As you make improvements to that approach, then you integrate it. Now, Baldrige has a very specific acronym that explains this process of maturing your process, and it's called ADLI. For those of you that are in the Midwest or the South, it's not Aldi's, the store, it's ADLI. So let me go through that again. You have a systematic, repeatable approach, or A. You deploy it. You make sure everybody that's supposed to use it is using it. You have to train them, coach them, monitor to make sure people are using it. That's the D in Adley. Then you measure, you have a measure in place for wanting to make sure that you know, is this process effective? You compare yourselves to best in class, and then you make improvements to that. That's called learning. We learn how to make improvements to our approaches. And then finally, we integrate with what's important. And that makes the Adley. And you say, well, what does it mean, integrate? Well, for us, when we became in our hiring process, we added peer interviewing as a cycle of improvement. But then we began using our values, and we translated our values into behavioral-based questions. And we began to ask those questions. That was an integration into our hiring process. So doing Baldrige, one of the beginning ways you can start doing that is focus on the processes embedded in the criteria, not the questions. Start with your key needs, you know, because then that's how you can begin to get some traction in this whole creating a more process honoring culture. Link those key needs to the process that's contributing to that need. Identify the owner, do the Adley work, then select your next approach. Or you can do multiple approaches at the same time. And then over time, you're building, excuse me, your operating model for performance excellence, and Baldrige maturity will develop, as will your results. And then at any point, you can write an application at your state level. And it's up to you when you feel like you're ready to be able to do that. I have a closing thought for you. Organizations, and I don't have to tell you this, have a lot going on. And I've listed a few that are up there. You know, you may be building things, doing mergers, community outreaches, there's new competition, you got new financial targets, you got employee turnover. Maybe your organization has decided that you're going to do lean, all sorts of things that are going on. How do you make sure that Baldrige doesn't become one more thing? How do you make sure Baldrige doesn't become the flavor of the day, or the program of the month, or the program of the new CEO? Well, let me provide you with something we learned at Good Sam, and I believe it's supported in research. One of the jobs of a leader is to make an aligned and integrated picture that can be understood and embraced. There has to be something that pulls everything together, that every leader, every workforce member in the organization, every board of trustee member, every trustee board member can cite, so that Baldrige is not some new program. It is a part of something bigger. Now, for Good Sam, I had mentioned to you earlier that in 2004 or 5, we began a journey. It wasn't a Baldrige journey. It was an improvement journey. It was a performance excellence journey. We called that moving from good to great. So when we first, and we're hospital, those of you that are in hospitals or education may have heard of the Studer Group. We began adopting those. Well, we began to see changes in our results, and good changes, as I had shared with you earlier. Then in 2007, we adopted Baldrige. And the first question from leaders was, wait a minute, so are we not doing Studer anymore? And our president, Dave Fox, was very wise. He knew the truth, that context is decisive. He also knew that people don't get motivated by organizational initiatives. They get motivated by something that aligns with their values. And moving from good to great, every clinician wants to provide an experience, they themselves as employees, a great organization. So Dave said, no, Baldrige is continuing our moving from good to great. Sometimes we called it moving from good to great 2.0. Well, several years went by, and then we adopted lean. And again, the question came, Are we not going to do Baldrige anymore? Are we stopping Baldrige? Are we going to do lean now? No, we are continuing on our journey of moving from good to great. So I don't know what your organizing principle is that can resonate with your workforce. My sister just got a job with an organization in North Carolina. Their organizing principle for their performance excellence journey is becoming remarkable. And so whatever they adopt, whether it's building new buildings or taking on a patient safety journey or becoming more financially solvent, it's all in service of something greater. So I would encourage you to talk to your senior leaders and make sure you have an organizing principle that is a part of a performance excellence journey. One closing thought, and it speaks to exactly what I was just talking about. Excellence is about key processes. Baldrige is absolutely right. And integrating it with what's important. It's also about having a culture of performance improvement. And that's where kind of the whole ADLI, maturing of processes, fits in. You get this and that vision for where you want to go as an organization, whether it's exceptional or remarkable or wherever. But the culture has to be, we're going to get better. But also leadership is required to achieve excellence. And I'm talking your senior leaders. So let's talk a little bit about what senior leaders must do. And this is in alignment with Category 1 in Baldrige. Leaders must set an inspiring vision for excellence. It's exactly what we were just talking about. And then to enroll the broader leadership team to go beyond genuine compliance and ownership to ownership of the vision. That this isn't about, our work isn't about projects. Actually, leaders have two jobs. One, get the job done. And two, improve how the job gets done. Three, senior leaders must also role model their commitment. This is about asking about improvements, asking about measurements, asking about benchmarks, their language, their questions, the goals that get set, the stretch goals, how resources are allocated. All of that is important. And finally, there must be an intentional creation of culture of high performance and engagement and continual learning and improvement. This is a job that belongs to senior leaders and is depicted in Category 1 of Baldrige. So I want to end with a few resources, and then I think we'll take some questions if you have, and then I think Margot has some additional thoughts she has about what the state programs are doing. But here's 3 things you can do. Front and center, the Alliance for Performance Excellence, the state programs, go to the website if you haven't already. Pull it up, click on your state, find out what's happening in your state with, like Margot was talking about for Illinois just this week. Find out the webinars, the training programs. If you're working on strategic planning, the states might have webinars or workshops to be able to help you with that. So that's one way. To the right screen at the top, go to the nist.gov/Baldrige website. There are self-assessments, find out publications. You can look up award recipient applications. If you're working on a particular process or approach, or you want to see what other healthcare or education or government or manufacturing organizations have done in terms of their best practices, you can go there and find out. And lastly, at the bottom, the 34th Quest for Excellence Conference in April. Couple highlights there. I will be doing a 3-hour workshop. Would love to see you. And we can take what you've learned today to the next level. In addition to that, Karen Rosser, she's the VP of Quality and Improvement Officer at Mary Greeley Medical Center. She will be doing the Advanced Intermediate workshop the Sunday before as well. And there are several keynotes, and you can hear from Baldrige recipients and state award recipients at the Quest for Excellence conference. So those are 3 places to start. Margot, do you have anything else you want to add? Otherwise, we can maybe take some questions.
No, I think you covered everything well, and I appreciate Patty reinforcing the value in working with the state programs, because as she shared, we have a lot of training opportunities. We have tiered level assessment, so we can start with the organizations that just heard about Baldrige a week ago, and we can work with more mature organizations. But I'd now like to open it up if you have any questions. As a reminder, you can type them in the question panel, and we can review them, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute your microphone.
I will also say I'm putting up my email address online on the screen. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have a question or comment. I'd be glad. I will respond. I promise you.
Thank you, Patty. Bob, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
I do. This one was typed in, and the question, Patty, is as we work on our approaches, how can my state program help us?
Okay. All right. I had mentioned. Yep, I mentioned a few things. Let me expand on that a little bit more. So let's go back to what's important. So let's say what you would like to do is you'd like to work in your organization on your organizational profile. First off, when you complete that, you can submit it to your state, get feedback on it, and even get recognized for it. But that particular, I hate to say it exercise, but it kind of is an exercise. They can help you figure out a way to work with your senior team in order to make that happen. What's the best approach to be able to get our senior leadership team to make the decisions about what our core competencies are and those types of things. So the state programs can help us with that. The approach can help us write it, maybe give us some coaching on that, and then also recognize us, which would be a cool thing for you. Then in terms of the approaches, like I said, if you're starting to work on those individual approaches, whether it's your hiring approach, your senior leader communication approach, maybe it's your listening approaches with your customers, look at the training opportunities that exist at your state level. Many of those will help you formulate or they can direct you to recipients who've had role model practices. So that's one of the ways your state program can assist you.
And Patty, if I could add to that, another
Sure.
great opportunities with your state program is to have people in your organization become examiners.
Yes.
It's just a tremendous development opportunity for the people that are examiners, but it also, the more people you have in your organization that have been examiners, it creates that critical mass of people that really
Agreed.
understand the criteria and what it's asking.
Agreed. Totally agreed.
Okay, are there any more questions?
Well, Patty, I have another question. This is Bob, and you know, if you had to get the answer to this question on one of those really little sticky notes, what are one or two things that you know now that you wish you had known when you first got started?
Two things. One, that this is about improving. It's about improving, because I'm not sure that's how we started. We started just with solely looking for the award, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you take the step back and start looking at how do we do these processes in our organization. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and I think Margot kind of hit at it, is there is a critical mass. The more people in your organization that can begin to get acquainted with becoming more process honoring in your organization, the better. which means engagement in the state program, engagement in the national program. And then the third thing, I don't think I realized, but I see it even more clearly now, how critical it is to have a larger context for why. What's the big why for why we are doing this? Is it to create an exceptional experience for our students? Is it to, whatever, that big why? You can't do this work without it. Otherwise it'll die. I guess that's a pretty big sticky note, but those are the three things I'd put on there. It's about process and process improvement. It's about getting more people on the bus to improvement. And thirdly, it's about senior leaders setting a big why.
And I have one last question, if time permits, and it's really around, looking back at the Good Sam journey. Were there unexpected benefits? Was there something that came out of the work that you weren't expecting or anticipating, but you looked at it, you said, that's really cool, and it's directly attributable to Baldrige?
Yeah. I think there's so many things. One of them was the idea of organizations having a core competency, something that differentiates you from your competitors, and it's really hard for your competitors to imitate. We really benefited from identifying what that was and leveraged that in our organization. So that was one thing. I think the whole concept of benchmarking, being in healthcare, you automatically benchmark your clinical outcomes, or at least at a high level. But we dove a lot deeper on that in our clinical outcomes. But then we started benchmarking all sorts of things, both in healthcare and without. So when we talked about our patient engagement, we started looking to the hospitality industry. When we, in the workforce, we started looking not just in healthcare organizations, but beyond. So benchmarking and listening to role models that really are doing it well. That's another one. I think another one was how we presented data in our measures. I mean, most organizations have a tremendous amount of things that they measure, but getting crystal clear, and I think the category 7, which is the category about results, really guides you to know what are the key types of things you should be collecting. And then we didn't talk about it in this webinar, but just like there's a process maturity called ADLI, a process to take your processes to maturity, there's a way to display your data, and that is around showing your level, showing your trend, showing a comparison. And so we began looking at our data more selectively and looking at it more comparatively and looking at it over time. So those would be the three things that I think that really surprised us and were real enhancements to not only our head knowledge, but our practice at Good Sam.
Well, thank you so much, Patty. We're getting tight on time here. There has been a few questions on if a recording will be available. Yes, we did record this, and I will send the link to participants, so a recording is available. And there also were a lot of comments on it. Was a great presentation, so they weren't really questions, Patty, but a lot of credit to you and what you shared with everyone. So thank you again for presenting today.
You're very welcome.
I would now like to introduce our webinar for next month. Next month on February 16th at 11 o'clock Eastern time, we have Polly Walker from the city of Henderson, Nevada. And she's going to be talking about becoming a superhero to our customers and community. So, really a focus on customer service. is what Polly will be sharing. So we hope you can join us. There's a link to register here. And then just, I want to thank you on behalf of all of our state and regional programs that host these events. If you're thinking about starting your Baldrige journey and you haven't started yet, here's the contact information for the programs that, again, are the hosts for this. If you are not with one of these programs, as Patty shared, you can go to the Alliance website and find out what program you're a part of. So thank you, everyone, for being with us today, and have a great rest of your week. And we hope to see you next month for our webinar with Polly Walker. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.